Stoic rules to conquer fear in any situation. Rule 1. Fear and emotion. To bear trials with a calm mind robs misfortune of its strength and burden. Seneca. To start with, let's have a look at how the Stoics viewed the relationship between our mindset, fear, and our emotions. To illustrate this, I'll describe an account from around 150 AD written by Aulus Gellius, a historian who survived a perilous journey across a turbulent Ionian Sea, in which many of the passengers and crew barely came away with their lives. To frame this story and add some context, the Stoics split our emotional response to fear into two halves: the instinctive and involuntary emotional reaction that hits us immediately when we experience a dangerous or terrifying encounter, and the emotional response that follows, which we are free to decide. Involuntary reaction. The Greeks called these reactions passions or propathei, and they were not seen as a negative, but as neutral and indifferent. They are simply the body and mind's response to a stimulus. They keep us alive, and they are something we cannot avoid. Like flinching when something is thrown at us, they are brief but inevitable and natural, and they occur before our next emotional response. Chosen response. The response that is decided deliberately after the involuntary reaction has stopped hijacking the system. Where many allow the involuntary response to continue to control their behavior, it is possible to learn how to regain composure and act deliberately. We will find out how. Back to the story. The passenger ship traveling from Cassiopeia to Brundisium carried a traveler's core to this story, the historian himself, and a Stoic philosopher and teacher. The name of this Stoic isn't known, but based on the time and location, it could well have been Apollonius of Chalcedon, a mentor of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, but we can't know for sure. During its voyage, the crew found themselves caught in a violent storm that threatened to capsize the ship and drown them. Gellius describes the look of horror and the screaming of men and women who believed they were about to be thrown overboard, to struggle helplessly against the wind and the waves. Among those fearful faces were the Stoic teacher and his students. Gellius wrote, "In our company was an eminent philosopher of the Stoic sect, whom I had known at Athens as a man of no slight importance, holding the young men who were his pupils under very good control. In the midst of the great dangers of that time and that tumult of sea and sky, I looked for him, desiring to know in what state of mind he was and whether he was terrified and courageous. And then I beheld the man frightened and ghastly pale, not indeed uttering any lamentations, as all the rest were doing, nor any outcries of that kind, but in his loss of color and distracted expression, not differing much from the others." This description from Gellius illustrates that involuntary reaction we spoke about earlier, the draining of color from our face and the change in our expression that happens when we face a potentially deadly situation. However, in the moments after this initial reaction, there is a space in which we can interject reason. This is where we can find value in the next part of the story. After the storm had passed, Gellius approached the Stoic teacher and asked him the reason for his fear. After all, are Stoics not supposed to be indifferent and steadfast in the face of external threat? The Stoic replied, Since you are desirous of knowing, hear what our forefathers, the founders of the Stoic sect, thought about that brief but inevitable and natural fear, or rather, read it. For if you read it, you will be the more ready to believe it, and you will remember it better. And he gave Gellius a copy of the 5th book in the Discourses of Epictetus. In the book, Epictetus explains that when we experience an external event, such as the storm at sea, we are immediately set upon by the perceived risk and threat of danger. This risk hijacks our senses, widens our eyes, focuses our mind, and raises our heart rate. Epictetus explains that even the wise man is subject to these early reactions and is temporarily robbed of reason. However, he goes on to explain that where the foolish man accepts this state of fear and allows themselves to be ruled by it, the wise man rejects it as soon as the hijacking passes and he regains his reason. Epictetus writes, and they say that there is this difference between the mind of a foolish man and that of a wise man, that the foolish man thinks that such visions are in fact as dreadful and terrifying as they appear at the original impact of them on his mind, and by his assent he approves of such ideas as if they were rightly to be feared, and confirms them, for phantasia is the word which the Stoics use in their discourses on the subject. But the wise man, after being affected for a short time and slightly in his color and expression, does not assent, but retains the steadfastness and strength of the opinion which he has always had about visions of this kind, namely that they are in no wise to be feared, but excite terror by a false appearance and vain alarms,